President Trump announced this afternoon that the United States will be pulling out of the Paris Agreement. That's an international agreement intended to combat global warming by reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. We're getting out. I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
Wow, that did it. The left immediately became hysterical, even more than usual. Keep in mind that this was a non-binding, unenforceable agreement whose effects, even if every nation involved followed the agreement to the letter, cannot be known with any precision. It doesn't matter. The world just ended, literally, as they say.
We all joke about him destroying the world, but this could be it.
Billionaire Democratic donor Tom Steyer described Trump's decision as, quote, assault and battery on the future of the American people. CNN warned its viewers to expect mass extinctions, flooding in the streets of New York City, the physical annihilation of the Marshall Islands. The ACLU, meanwhile, somehow concluded that leaving the agreement was, and this is a quote, a massive step back for racial justice and an assault on communities of color. Didn't explain how. And then there was cable news. My gosh, the long faces, the grave intonations, the florid and outraged proclamations. It was like somebody died, millions of them, actually.
On a sunny day in the Rose Garden, what could be defined and construed as a dark speech.
This will be the day that the United States resigned as the leader of the free world.
What happened yesterday on the climate issue is an embarrassment to our country. It should be an embarrassment to him personally for how he answers to his grandchildren.
People are going to die. Habitat will be destroyed. Seas will rise. Insects will spread.
We haven't, President, this psychological trouble in this way since at least Richard Nixon.
I'm not a crook.
I have such rage and sadness. We just watched a dangerous little man give a very, very scary speech.
One of the most bleak depictions of America's role in the world as environmental partners.
So he is not helping the forgotten American. He is hurting them. Their kids will have worse asthma in the summer.
What you're watching is a priesthood defending its faith. The essence of science, meanwhile, is skepticism that's relentlessly testing what you think you know to make certain you actually know it. People who ran the space program didn't know everything, and they knew it. That's not happening here. It's not allowed. Press for explanations as to what they're talking about, and you're attacked as immoral, a denier. The matter is settled. Every word immutable and holy. Questions equal apostasy. Shut up and believe. The irony is that almost none of the religious figures you saw sermonizing on television today actually know much about the Paris Agreement beyond the bullet points they've been handed by their producers 10 minutes before. What's in it? Do they have any idea? And if so, why haven't they told us till now? Before today, most of the people you just saw spent far more time yammering about Clockboy and transgender bathrooms than about climate accords. So what is in the agreement? Well, there are a lot of things in the agreement, and a few of them are worth knowing. First, if the U.S. were to stick with this accord, we'd be pledging to cut our greenhouse gas production by at least 26% below the levels it was in 2005. That's a big reduction. And it's not expected of China, India, or other huge polluting countries who, by the way, happen to be our chief economic rivals.
We would lose 6.5 million jobs. Meanwhile, countries like India and countries like Iran, we would have to pay them to reduce their carbon emissions.
China, meanwhile, has not pledged a cent, the world's biggest polluter. In fact, China is likely to receive some of this money. Keep in mind the Chinese economy is predicted to overtake our economy in less than a year from right now, but somehow we ought to subsidize their energy production? That is lunacy. It's masochism. We've already guessed how we're supposed to pay for all of this, higher energy costs here. Americans would pay more for gas, more for electricity, more in taxes, all in the name of meeting obligations that other countries don't have to meet.
I can't imagine a worse agreement than this thing for the American worker.
This is a debate. It's a big deal. A lot is at stake for Americans who, by and large, know nothing of the details. Shouldn't Congress have a chance to debate this and vote on it like they're supposed to? Actually, they already had that chance. It came in 2009. President Obama had a Democratic House and a Senate supermajority that year. The people now telling you that global warming is an existential threat to the world, that everyone will die if we don't get a handle on it, had more power at that moment than at any time since the New Deal in the 30s. And they could have done something about global warming openly and democratically. Did they? No. They focused on passing the stimulus package, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank. Well, since that year, American voters have consistently elected majorities for whom global warming is not a priority. because outside of affluent pockets and a relatively small number of zip codes, global warming itself is not a top priority for the American public, not even close. Maybe it should be, but it's not. And that's how democracy works. The public gets to decide what is most important. Now, the people in charge disagree with it. They don't care what voters think. They lost interest in democracy a long time ago, and they're no longer hiding that fact. They don't believe you should be consulted before they change your life forever, and mostly they don't bother to consult you. Except today, for once they didn't get their way, and of course they're hysterical about it. Maybe now they'll have to make a real argument on behalf of what they believe before imposing it by force on you.
The rest of the world, some of them, their brains are exploding because Uncle Sucker isn't going to be the sucker on this whole thing.
And now who will be? Who will be, right? I mean, will the French pick up that? Will the Germans pick up that? Are they willing to pony up the dough?
No, they're not willing to pony it up. They're going to continue to try to shame the United States into doing what they don't want to do.
Is it fair for China to keep polluting at alarming rates and for America to be the one cutting back on carbon and China does do nothing? Is it fair that Russia gets to increase their carbon output by 50%? That is not fair to America. It's not fair to the American workers. And I'm betting you that the viewership will say, you know what? America will say, we'd like to have jobs, and we don't want these alarmists who are saying that we're going to have mass extinction. We don't want these people in charge. They were in charge the past 8 years, and they tried to kill most of the jobs in my state.
I'm just wondering how this specific agreement, sending $3 billion a year to countries like India and China, who don't have to lower their emissions rates, is going to fix the global warming problem in Miami Beach.
Tucker, let me tell you what's going on in Miami Beach. When I became mayor, we have streets that are flooding during sunny days.
You're actually dodging my question completely. How will the terms of the Paris Agreement, specifically handing $3 billion a year to India and China, which do not have to lower their emissions in the rest of this generation, how will that help what's going on in Miami Beach, the things you just described?
Tucker, the bottom line is, as the world is getting too hot and too warm, the oceans are rising, and that's affecting Miami Beach, and it's affecting all coastal cities. We must cool the globe down. I
can't let you dodge it again. I'm asking you about a very specific agreement that you and everyone else on the left is beating their chests about, and Trump is destroying the world. Okay, fine, I'm open-minded. Tell me how that specific agreement and the financial arrangements in it will help the problems you describe.
And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, I'm not the guy from the left. And the one thing I can tell you is this. I'm in that radical center. I call myself a radical centrist. And the bottom line is rising oceans.
And why don't you tell me why allowing China to take a pass on reducing its greenhouse emissions for years is going to reduce global warming and its effects? I don't understand. What's the answer?
But the fact of the matter is, think about it, Tucker. China signed this agreement. Europe signed it. India signed it. Everyone's in it together to make the globe a better place, to reduce these emissions. And I mean, come on. You're talking about going through.
Is there a single person watching this show stupid enough to be convinced by what you are saying?
China, which is one of the world's worst polluters, wouldn't really have to take any action or do anything about this, as you mentioned, until 2030. Meanwhile, the United States would have to pay out something like $3 billion to third world dictators who are among some of the worst polluters on the planet.
Some of the most successful people in the world are highly upset about this, and almost none of them have bothered to explain what's actually in the Paris deal, though. But they assure us that deal is the solution to the single gravest threat this planet has ever faced, rising levels of atmospheric CO2. They're dead serious about that. You can tell by the outraged looks on their faces and the purple rhetoric. But hold on a minute. Can we really be sure that these people take carbon emissions seriously? Billionaire retailer Richard Branson, he says fossil fuels are dangerous, and he calls Trump's decision, quote, America first, Earth last. Now, on the other hand, Branson owns a Dassault Falcon 50EX private jet. It burns more fuel on a single flight to Maui than you're going to go through in a lifetime of trips to the shore. Elon Musk, meanwhile, is mad about global warming too, yet he flies around in a Gulfstream G650ER. Bill Gates says he's deeply concerned, yet he still commutes in a $62 million Bombardier BD700 Global Express. Can you imagine the gas mileage that gets? Leonardo DiCaprio says Trump's move threatens, quote, the livability of our planet. And yet DiCaprio flew a private jet 4,000 miles from Cannes, France to New York to accept a climate award and then flew back privately. Hillary Clinton tweeted that Trump's pullout was, quote, a historic mistake that leaves American workers and families behind. And yet, speaking of workers and their families, there probably weren't a lot of those on board last year when Hillary used a private jet to fly 20 miles from Martha's Vineyard to Nantucket for a fundraiser, a critical fundraiser. Also, it's a little rich for Clinton to tout the needs of the planet on the very same day, today, that a new email was revealed showing she once requested a separate private plane from Michelle Obama to fly to Betty Ford's funeral. And of course, there's the former President Barack Obama, who for whatever reason never seems to get the credit the awesome hypocrisy he displays so deserves. Obama told us just yesterday that Trump's refusal to take CO2 emissions seriously could, quote, crush future generations. And yet, here's some of what he has done just since January. On the day he left office, Obama took a Marine helicopter to a government-owned 747. He flew that across the country to Palm Springs, California. After a few days of relaxing at an 11,000 square foot mansion, can you imagine the air conditioning required for that? The electricity bill, unbelievable. He flew then on Richard Branson's private plane to the Caribbean. Then he got on a private boat that took him to Branson's private island. He later left on a private jet, then took another private jet to Tahiti in the French Polynesia. After that trip wrapped up, he took another private jet to Milan, where a 14-car caravan escorted him to a conference where he spoke about, brace yourselves, global warming. Leaving open the question, how much do any of these people really care about carbon emissions? If you want to know how all of this might end, look across the Atlantic. European electricity, and some people actually care what it costs.
Please.
There costs 3 times as much as it does here, and the prices are rising faster there as well. Despite all of this, even supporters of the agreement concede, the ones who actually know what's in it, there aren't many, that it won't come close to stopping global warming even if everyone abided by the terms. It won't come close to stopping global warming even if everyone abided by the terms.
New York Daily News, you see this? Trump to world drop dead. That we're all going to die. All right? And then I'm thinking, all right, well, I guess we're going to die. And this is not a good day because I came close to that last year and all that for nothing. And I'm looking at the Dow. And I'm looking at all the markets. Well, surely they would trade off if we're all going to die, right? I mean, absolutely. Why invest if you're not even going to have the money to spend? Because, like I said, we're all going to die. The environment's going to go kablooey, and it's all going to be over. So really, why even celebrate life itself or invest in a stock when the planet you're on is going? But look at this. Look at this. The Dow at a record. S&P at a record. NASDAQ at a record. Growing optimism at a record. Americans' wherewithal and financial balance sheets, the best they have been ever, 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 ever. Credit scores at the highest they have ever been. Ever, ever, ever. And then I'm thinking of that accord. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, in that accord, long before we signed that accord, weren't we already bringing our carbon emissions down by double digits? Weren't we already leading the world prior to that accord and bringing down our emissions? And didn't that have more to do with a country that was focusing on fracking and finding cheaper, cleaner natural gas that had nothing to do with what the French are saying, the Italians are saying, and I love the Italians.
As of 2014, the world's top CO2 emitters were China and the United States. But now check out this chart. See the line that's going up? That's China's carbon dioxide emissions rising, and that green line going down, well, that's the United States emissions falling.
Conservatives believe that you can inspire people to be self-motivated to do the right thing. Just look at that chart that Trace showed. Liberals believe you have to use the heavy hand of government. That's what this whole Paris Climate Accord was all about, the heavy hand of government.